afternoon and welcome back to GSC Executives Podcast with your host, Caitlin Ty. And today we're delighted to have on Ingrid Osborne, who's Divisional Chairwoman of Taylor Wimpey London and South East. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. How are you today?
Very well, very well. It's a bit rainy outside, but you can't have it all.
No change. Just an excuse to go on holiday, isn't it?
Yeah.
So kind of just to kick things off, could you please give me a brief background on how you've achieved your position that you're currently in today?
Yeah, sure. So I started quite a long time ago now on the graduate scheme. It was the George Wimpey graduate scheme at the time. It was pre-merger. So I finished my degree at university. I did politics, philosophy and economics actually at university. So not entirely property related or not property related at all really. I joined the graduate scheme in 2001.
Yeah.
And then had a rotational phase, which all the grads did.
Yeah.
At the time, we owned North America as well. So we went over to America for a bit and did all of that. And then you kind of chose your route of choice.
Yeah.
A preference through the business. So I went into the land side of the business, land and planning.
Yeah.
So I started out as a land buyer in Solihull, actually, in the West Midlands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I'd been around the country. That was part of the rotational programme.
Different
parts of the country, different offices as well, because we still have McLean businesses and Wimpey businesses at the time.
Right.
Anyway, and then I continued in that side of the business. So I became land manager, then senior land manager. By this point, I moved down to Brentwood in Essex, so in sort of the London South East patch. And then a couple of years after that, I think I was about 25 by now, maybe 26. I became land and planning director for the Brentwood office, so East London.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was they covered Essex and East London, as they still do now, actually. But it was a really interesting time in East London. It was when there was a lot happening in those sort of Hackney, Wick, Stratford areas, and a lot of change. So we were a busy team. And I also had even more to do, I guess, because in those days we didn't have technical directors. So the land and planning director also ran the technical team. And that's quite a big team, actually, about 15, 16 people, plus the land and planning side. So I started running that then. And then fast forward a few years, the short version is I became a director, general manager, I think we called it at the time. It was kind of like a try you out for an MD role. So I did that. And in the meantime, we'd had the merger. Then it came to GSC. There were huge changes, for obvious reasons, sort of across the whole business. And as an outcome of that, I was asked to run a different portfolio to what I'd been running before. And that was a really interesting time because there were lots of difficult situations, joint ventures. We had arbitrations with contractors going, all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
And I did that for a little while. And then out the back of that, and I had a small team with me doing that. And we did a really good job in difficult circumstances. And out of that, so we get into sort of 2010 and we had a couple of large joint ventures in London that we were still committed to and involved in, one in Greenwich, which we're still involved in, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
And one near the Thames Barrier with one of our competitors. And I felt at the time, and having been through the land side of the business, that things were changing in the London market. And by now, I'd been in London quite a while and had a good feel for what was going on. And consequently, I spoke to my divisional chair at the time, who was Peter Truscott, and then subsequently with Pete Redfern, who was our CEO. And I wrote a business plan in that year to open a new operating business, which was signed off in 2010. And that was to create Taylor Wimpey Central London.
Yeah.
So that was then created. Yeah. And I ran that business for 8 years after that as managing director. So that was my first official managing director role. So 2010 to 2018, had a stint of maternity leave in 2015, but came back and till 2018. And that was a fantastic 8 years, really interesting, completely different business model.
And the fact you'd kind of written that business plan yourself, it's kind of like your business baby.
Yeah. So then, and created the team, and that's really important because, creating any team from scratch isn't isn't easy, and something obviously you want to get right for
100%.
obvious reasons, but also because the skill sets required for that type of business were quite different, and we kind of had to figure out between me and the team that small team I did have at the start, how to run that business, so structurally as well as the people in the individual roles thereafter. So that was a challenge, but I think we came through that successfully. And then after that, I was asked to oversee another business. So 2 businesses. There was a divisional MD. So the East London one, actually, which, back in the day I'd been part of. So that was great. And also Central London. And I did that for maybe 18 months. And then I got a phone call, a bit of a change around in Taylor Wimpey. And long story short, I was offered the role of divisional chair, which was taking over 6 businesses. So that was kind of the short version to how I got here. And that was 6 years ago. So I've been divisional chair for this division for just over 6 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's a very short version. Yeah.
No, but I just think it's great how you've kind of come in as a graduate and kind of, this is your whole career, and it's just amazing how you've been able to work your way up in the business, and kind of, it's nice that obviously you've mentioned that you do things in East London now as well, which is kind of what you were doing at the earlier start of your career. So no, it's amazing. Kind of, why did you pursue your career in the housing sector? I know obviously you mentioned at uni you didn't do anything to do with housing. So
no, I didn't. And do you know what? I consider myself extremely lucky that I did get into property, because it really was at the very start. It was luck, really, because I don't have, historically, my family or my friends, I didn't have any history or attachment to the property industry. And often you do find people have some kind of connection who get into property, and I didn't. And actually, I'm sure we'll come back to it later, but that's why I do feel quite strongly about how we get the word out wider about what a great industry it is, because for people like me who had no idea, I was lucky enough to find it, and I would like to feel that I helped other people find it, if you see what I mean, because it has been a great career. So I saw an advert in the careers newsletter for the George Wimpey graduate scheme, and I'd done my degree, got my 2-1, and pleased with that. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, actually,
as most people.
I didn't.
I'm in school, I'll go to uni, and then what?
Exactly. And I had different ideas, and I wanted to be a lawyer, actually, at one point. And anyway, a lot of my peers at the time, were applying for sort of certain types of jobs, management consultancy, and going to big accounting firms and things like that. And I just felt I had a very strong feeling. And with hindsight, I think it was a lot to do just with the feel, the cultural vibe that I got from those people, actually. Perhaps didn't necessarily realise that at the time, but sitting here now, I realise that that's probably what it was. But I went to different interviews with some of those other types of roles, and I just thought,
it's just not fitting.
This is not me. I don't feel like this is my world. And then I saw the ad for George Wimpey, and I thought, well, that's really different. And I've never been scared of doing things differently. I think that's kind of, again, when I look back at my childhood and sort of growing up, and I was never really worried if I was doing things that other people weren't doing. That never really, it was part of my psyche, really. So I thought, well, that's interesting, that's different. I'll have a look into that. So of course, then the more you research, the more you find out about, the company, but also the industry, the types of issues that it deals with. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, how interesting. And the rotational nature of the scheme was also very attractive. You get to understand quite quickly in a different way how the business fits together. And I also like the idea that you create something, and obviously something very important, something very important to people. So all of those things together, I pursued it, and happily
you are today.
I got offered the role. So here I am now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think you're so right in the sense of you shouldn't be worried about doing things different from other people, because you need to do what's right for yourself. And kind of, if you hadn't followed this route, who knows obviously where you would what you'd be doing now, but Yeah, no.
No, I think that's right, and I think that is right. I think unfortunately, though, there is a lot of peer pressure in
Yeah.
this world, and particularly, when you're younger, you're less sure of yourself, perhaps, and it can be easy to feel that you should be doing what everybody else is doing. And now, as I say, I was relatively lucky that, generally speaking, and there were always exceptions, I didn't feel like that. But that not everybody does, and I think it is an important message that there are routes for everyone, and it doesn't have to be the same as everybody else.
Yeah.
Your route, if you find your own way in life and find a route that makes you happy,
Yeah, you're more likely to do a better job of it because you're passionate about what you're doing rather than kind of doing an average job at a job that you're kind of not really interested in doing. Yeah,
exactly that. Yeah,
and you're working the majority of your life, so you got to make the most of it.
True. Yeah.
So what would you say is Taylor Wimpey's biggest strength compared to its competitors?
I think, and I've worked here for a long time, but I really do think it's the people and the culture in Taylor Wimpey. And that's an easy thing to say, but I genuinely feel that it's true. I think it's got a very unique type of culture insofar as it's a supportive culture, collaborative. People really do want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But that said, we should never be underestimated because we work very hard.
Of course, yeah.
And and I think sometimes people can make that misinterpretation that the two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can be very tough and have high expectations and and set high goals and standards, but still do it in a supportive way that everybody feels like they are being treated fairly and everyone's fundamentally there to do the right thing. And I think that's a very strong cultural principle that flows through Taylor Wimpey. And I hear from others who aren't necessarily in Taylor Wimpey but work in other sort of sectors or are generally quite close to house building, but that they hear that too, and it is seen to be one of our USPs. I think
that's really well. You're a prime example. I guess say having your whole career that they must be doing something right.
Yeah.
So, kind of, what would you say is your vision for Taylor Wimpey in the future?
I would really like to see that excellent cultural principle and the real desire to see a modern and high achieving company in a diverse way be more visible externally. So to my earlier point, I guess, just to try and spread the net wider as to what we offer, what we as a company offer, but what the industry more widely offers. And break down some of the misperceptions and perhaps the sort of more negative expectations around what house building is. And it's very different to what a lot of people think. And I think, in the future, I'd really love to see that message continuing to get out there, because I think it is, and we have been doing a lot more to try and actively, extend our recruitment nets and try and find different types of people, but to really, do that further. And I think, housing's a very emotive, but very important and really at the moment as well, very political topic. And, it really matters, I think, that we are seen to be the type of company that we really are, and, much more in a way that reaches a wider audience, I guess.
Yeah, because I think with obviously housing, it's not like you study housing in school. Like, you obviously know about it, like you go home to your house, that sort of thing. But like, you don't kind of, for me, if I thought of it as a child, I would think, oh, like bricklayer or something. I wouldn't think of the other jobs involved in it. That's why I think it is really good how you are trying to kind of broaden your network of how you do recruit, because without education of knowing the jobs, no one's going to kind of come forward unless obviously they take a chance like you did. So
yeah, and that's the thing, and it's really interesting, when we have people join us in the company, from out of sector, relatively frequently, and they quite often say, wow,
This is what I
the amount of things that have to happen for that house to be built is quite mind-boggling, and I think that's the bit that people don't necessarily, because you're right, a lot of people have the image of the hard hat, and of course, that's a hugely important and brilliant part of our world, but it's not the only part. There's lots of roles to play behind the scenes, and the planning process, the sales and marketing process, the finances, the legal side of it, the political side of it. It's just a huge amount. Quantity surveying, it goes on. There's such a lot that all has to come together, before you actually see that end product, and I think that's part of the message we want to continue to get out there, as well as particularly from the site perspective, increasing the proportion of females that we have on site, as well in senior leadership positions generally, but particularly on site, because that, I think that would be quite an achievement if we made more of a shift in that.
Oh, definitely. Obviously, it's not going to kind of happen overnight. But
no, it takes time. Takes time, and and we are making progress, and I'm really pleased about that. But yes, I think if we're looking ahead in a bit sort of longer term, future type view, that's what I would like to see.
That's brilliant. So, kind of throughout your career, what would you say is your toughest decision you've had to make?
Been lots of tough decisions, I think, along the way, and some at the time you realise are really tough, and some you look back and you realise were tougher than you thought. If you see what I mean.
Kind of get tied up at the moment. It was like, oh gosh, that was.
Yeah, I mean, there's everyday decisions, that aren't straightforward, and we as a team do that quite regularly. But I guess on sort of a bigger front, I've had to make decisions along the way about merging business units, for example. I've been involved in closing business units down. Wasn't necessarily my decision, but I had to follow it through. Particularly sort of earlier in my career, and those sorts of scenarios are really hard. They're hard. There's no getting away from that, because you're dealing with people. And even though it's the right thing to do, obviously by the time you've got to that decision, you're straight in your head that that's the right thing to do for the business and stakeholders, and that's your job at the end of the day. The reality is you're dealing with individuals, and often individuals pretty well, and that's hard. But as I say, that's sort of what you get paid for at the end of the day.
And if it has to be done, as kind of brutal as it sounds, obviously there's a right way of doing it, of course.
And that's right. And I think that's really important, actually, that, when you are in those difficult situations and you have had to make difficult decisions, that you then execute that in the most, supportive and honest way that you can. And then, I think that's the best you can do.
Definitely.
For people in those situations,
So kind of on the flip side of that, on a happier note, what would you say your greatest achievement is? So you.
Oh, well, actually, there are probably two. Actually, I've got two sort of quite different type of answers sort of going around in my mind. One of them relates to people, I would say, and the fact that over the many years that I've been here, there's still a significant amount of people who still work either for me directly or indirectly, and who've been around and progressed through the company, actually. And then I've had a couple of people move up into really quite senior roles over my career, but also quite recently, and I feel that it makes me really happy to think that there's those people who have forged a path and have enjoyed working for Taylor Wimpey and for me, and and others underneath me, and that I think that is a big achievement, because not everybody can say that. So that would be one of them. And then probably opening and running Central London was a really big thing to do, and and I realised it was at the time, but when I look back, I think I realised even more so, what a great opportunity it was, but B, what a risk that was taken on me, really, to invest that amount of money in that type of business. So I'm grateful for that the risk was taken on me, and I thoroughly enjoyed that whole journey, really.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even kind of just the fact that you've put all that information together and had to present it must have been so nerve-wracking in the first way, let alone actually, right, okay, here's all the money. Now go and do it. It's like, oh, right, okay then. But no, I guess, as I said before, it's kind of because you've kind of drafted it all up, put that business plan together, you're even more motivated to be like, it's got to work now because I've created this. So no, it's fantastic. So what would you say are the most important qualities for an effective divisional chairwoman?
Well, I mean, it's hard to sort of separate an effective divisional chairwoman from a leader generally, but I guess you can do to an extent, because the difference is, and I'm thinking back to, the difference between being an MD and being a divisional chair is, you're a step further removed. So you're managing at a distance as opposed to, in the office or, in meetings with your teams every day, face to face. It's a different type of relationship, and it's a different type of role. And I think in order to do that, fundamentally, you've got to trust the people who are working for you. So, I think building that trust both ways is super important, because when you are one step removed, obviously, you're relying on them those people to run the business in the right way, and also keep you informed when necessary, but not all the time. That balance isn't easy, and you don't get it unless you trust each other. And I think it takes effort to build trust, and and that works both ways. And I think in order to do that, you've got to be honest. You've got to be honest with the people who are working for you, and also the wider team that goes to as well, and listen to them, because nobody's got all the answers, and they are the ones who are seeing the day to day, what is going on. So to be well informed about what's really going on in the business, not what you might think should be or might be, but what actually is going on in the business, and to really listen, and then be honest about what it is you're trying to achieve and the business is trying to achieve. The wider Taylor Wimpey aims, be honest about and clear in your explanation of that, because it's very easy for things to get lost in translation.
I've seen that. Good communication.
I've seen that many times, and trying to break down the really key messages and repeat them over and over again. This is why it's important, and this is why we've got to concentrate on it. And then supporting people to do that, being there. I mean, I always at the end of the phone, and I always ring back. Whoever rings me, I'll always ring them back as soon as I can, and so I'm always there when I'm needed. But equally, if you're an MD running a business, the last thing you want is someone sitting on your shoulder all the time. So that's no good. So getting that balance right, I think, is really important. And then I guess I'm the conduit between the business and the centre, in terms of understanding what's going on, reflecting their views, but also, reflecting the views back from the centre. Well, we hear all that, but this is what, is important to us, and this is why. And then, so those messages going either way. So I think, that it's important to understand that when you're in a role like I am. And then encourage, I think what I've done in my tenure as well is to really encourage collaboration across the businesses, so not everybody to be working in their silo and 5 businesses to be doing it 5 different ways. And generally across the business, we've been driving a lot more of a culture of consistency and standardization under Jenny and Jenny's leadership. That's very important to her. But I think, the way that I've tried to do that over my sort of 6 years has been encouraging people to talk to each other, pick up the phone, don't understand if they've done it before, understand why they're doing it really well, understand why, what are they doing differently to you. That means they're achieving what they're achieving, and rather than trying to reinvent wheels, sort of.
If someone's already done it right, you may as well.
And I think we have we've driven that culture quite strongly sort of in the division, and now, across the wider business, trying to sort of encourage that interaction so that we can assist with that sort of standardization, consistency message, which is really important to the overall group. So I think for all of those reasons, that's sort of what makes me as a chair effective.
Yeah. You've got all those resources there. You may as well make the most use of it also. Yeah. So what would you think? Why do you think diversity and inclusion is such an important topic?
I think there's lots of answers to that, but I think in its simplest form, I just think it makes a conversation better. If you've got different viewpoints, people who are willing to say, well, you all seem to be going this way and thinking that, but actually, I don't see it like that. Be willing to make those points. I think, and that's not just a woman-man thing. That's all sorts of different backgrounds. That's why diverse teams are better, because somebody else just might see it a bit differently, and that might be the right best idea everyone's had all year. Whatever it might be. So I think in its simplest form, that's a good thing for any business.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a different tone to a meeting when there's different people around the table. And I've seen that in action, and it's true. So I think in its simplest form that, and then I think, from a customer point of view, having people around the table making decisions about what you're going to be buying in the future, and having voices and people and faces who are more representative of wider range of people can only be a good thing in terms of what the end result is, and how we interact with customers, what we build for them, what we try to do in terms of making that community sustainable, all these types of things. I think if you've just got different people around the table making those sorts of decisions, it's good for your customers as well as for the wider business.
So obviously, with being a senior position, how has this affected you in a very male-dominated? That was completely wrong. With being in a senior position in a very male-dominated industry, has this affected you at all?
Yes, I mean, I'm sure it has, and I think when I reflect on that sort of question, I think in positive ways as well as sort of not so positive ways sometimes, because if you are the only, and over the years it is better now, but it's still the case that I'm often the only woman in the room or in a meeting, and very regularly, sort of years ago that was true, and I guess the positive is you're memorable.
You've got to play on the advantage.
It's an advantage to be the only one who isn't, the white male wearing a suit. It helps you if you see it that way, see it positively, and you be more memorable is an advantage if you make it work for you. Clearly. So I think there has been positives, and I think another positive is, you can be underestimated, and you can use that to your advantage as well, if you if you think about it that way. But there have also been times when I've been frustrated. It's frustrating. You feel like, I'm sure lots of women would resonate with this. You feel like you've just said something, and then a man says it 5 minutes later, and everyone's I mean,
just completely
I said that 5 minutes ago, and I don't know why that is sometimes, whether that's like a group think thing, or I've often wondered maybe it's just the tone of your voice or something. I don't know, but and I speak to lots of women in our business and also in other businesses, and they say things like that, and I think I recognise that, so that can be frustrating. And I've also been to many a meeting where it's automatically assumed someone else is the boss, and they're not the boss. And even when it's made clear that no, actually no, that's me, they still direct their questions elsewhere, and you think, and don't get me wrong, I think there are many brilliant men who are huge advocates, and I wouldn't be where I am if that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we're talking examples for the sake of making a point, and you know that's not the sort of thing that happens all the time. As I say, there are many superb men who are great champions for women and other, you know, other areas of diversity, and I think that's wonderful, and they should be celebrated.
Oh, definitely.
And you know, it's really necessary for everyone to work together and, you know, understand each other's point of view, because it's, you know, it can be a really sensitive topic, and you know, everyone's point of view is valid, and I think the more you can try and understand that and break it down and you know, get people to help each other in those sorts of circumstances, the better. Because the other thing I think about that is, you know, it gets easier the older and more senior you get as well. And I think, you know, for more junior members of staff, it's what they need a supportive voice and advocacy to give them confidence to speak up and to, you know, to drive forward and not feel that they're going to be overlooked, or that they're not being listened to, or they're not being heard. And you know, you need men and women doing that for men and women. And as I say, you know, I don't want to make this just about men and women, but you know, about other aspects of diversity as well, you know, to recognize some of those challenges and to just, you know, try and do something about it, and even in small ways.
Oh yeah, because I think even if you kind of get a diverse workforce, if they're not kind of confident enough and don't have the support there to speak up and voice their opinions and ideas,
you're not hearing it.
So it's like, yeah, great, I've got a diverse workforce, but you're not getting anything out of it.
To speak up, absolutely.
It's all about communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you think the industry must improve its diversity efforts in the future?
I think the first thing to say is probably that I've seen a lot of progress, you know, in Taylor Wimpey and in other organisations, particularly in Taylor Wimpey. You know, we've worked hard to improve. I mean, I think it's about, a bit like I said earlier, you know, how do you attract from a different pool of people? Yeah. So, you know, being more out there in terms of message and, you know, trying to sell that message of, have a look here, you know, you might be surprised.
Yeah, like this isn't kind of what you might have in your
thought.
head.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Bob the Builder or something.
Yeah, it's, you know, so I think pushing those messages out more, well, I guess, you know, more unashamedly, you know, just this is a really good career. Yeah. And, you know,
so many
you
different
should have a look at it. Not, you know, sometimes
I
do feel like we can be a bit apologetic about, you know, because perceptions can be negative, and I think being positive about the careers we offer, really proud of what we do, because people who work for us, you know, in the industry are really proud of what they do and what they achieve, because it's, you know, really hard. Yeah, it's hard work, and people work really hard and produce some fantastic results, and should rightly be proud of that. So I think, you know, in the attraction space, you know, how can that, you know, message be stronger and heard from a wide audience? And then in the retention piece, you know, thinking more regularly about, I don't know, things like family-friendly policies. Have we got that right? You know, are we able to retain the people that we've got? Because clearly that is also just as important. Otherwise, you're on a constant treadmill. You know, you attract people, you lose them. You've got to attract people, you lose them, and that's never going to work. You're never going to change the dial. You've got to attract
and retain
a different type of, you know, from a different type of area, and then you've got to retain that, and then you've got to develop them through the company and keep that cycle going. So I think just, you know, concentrating on retention as well, just as much as, you know, have we got our policies right? Have we got our feedback loop right? You know, are we open to new ideas? Are we actively looking at ways to develop people differently? You know, and thinking, maybe taking a bit more of a risk on people, or thinking outside the box a bit about how they could get a greater business breadth, for example, things like that. Yeah. So I think it's a combination of all of those things to make sure you get the balance right, and then over time the dial will change. Yeah, because I think a lot of companies do forget about the retention side of things. They're like, oh yeah, let's put all this investment into getting new people to start, and then it's just like,
everyone else kind of just gets left behind and forgotten about. And you want your core people still kind of being motivated and still developing their skills and staying within the business.
You do. And then they're an advocate, for the next generation as well, So I think trying to get all of those parts of the equation right. I mean, not easy, obviously, but important.
Yeah. So what would you say is the hardest barrier to overcome when you're trying to implement diversity and inclusion within the workspace?
I think there's probably a really simple, obvious one, which is that everyone's busy. Yeah. And, with the best will in the world, these things take effort.
Yeah.
And I think as a leader, it's really incumbent on you to impart to your workforce that, this isn't a nice to have. This isn't somewhere down the bottom of your list somewhere.
This is important.
This is top of the list stuff because, if you don't concentrate on it and get it right, you're not going to have the strongest team that you could have. If you want to be the best you can be, you've got to have the strongest team that you can have. And, making that consistently towards the top of the agenda rather than something that falls to the bottom, I think is a really important point, because if you could be realistic, there's only so many hours in a day, and everybody's got a lot of things to deliver. So I think you're naive if you don't think that that's true. It's true. So just time and making it top of people's agenda, I think is probably one of the answers. And then I've forgotten what the question was now. Sorry.
The hardest barrier to overcome.
Oh, barrier. That's right. And then I think it is a perception thing. It's how do you really make sure what it is the perception is? So what are you trying to answer? Yeah. What are you trying to answer? The aim? Yeah. And then how do you change that? And it's easy to say, oh, we've got to shout louder and we've got to this, but people have been saying that for a long time. And it's more like, okay, and then how though? How are we going to do that differently? Which audience are we going to try to reach? And we've been doing a fair bit lately around schools outreach, for example, and targeting different schools in areas close to the regional businesses, and that's time consuming and but brilliant, and the people who do it find it so rewarding. But things like that are interesting, just to understand what the perceptions and the barriers actually are, so that you are trying to answer the right question.
Got to do your
obviously
research
slightly
beforehand,
pointless otherwise.
So what would you say are the long-term consequences if we ignore or fail to recognise diversity and inclusion within the workplace?
I mean, I just think the world is moving, the world is changing. And if you don't do that as a business, and there are many, really interesting sort of examples along the years of where that's happened to big corporate organisations. You've got to change, you've got to modernise, you've got to stay with the times. Otherwise you fall by the wayside, and at best you stagnate, at worst you fail. And obviously, you don't want to be in that position. You want to be in a position where you're evolving and you're changing. And I think it's dangerous if you don't recognise that and see that as a really important force for the future about how you can be a more inclusive, more effective operation that is aiming for excellence, that is going for the next stage. You don't want to be doing that, just okay. I think that's a route to, well, as I say, stagnation at best. And I think recognizing that, looking ahead, what are the perceptions, what are the future obstacles we might be facing, and what can we do about that? That's, again, is the role of good leadership, and looking ahead more strategically, for the next thing and the next thing, as opposed to just what we're trying to do today. So it's a mixture of making sure we are doing today that's top of the list as much as we can or should be doing, and then looking ahead to the future about how else can we try and change the dial for the good of the company and its future, really,
and keeping that success ongoing. Exactly.
And it's not easy. It's not easy to keep, because everybody's busy, as I said earlier. Everybody's got a day job. You've got things to achieve, and that's super important, obviously, but but moving ahead, being,
You've always got to
building a
have that
better
end kind of
future.
goal in there.
Where are we
Yeah.
going? What's the vision? I think, you've got to keep that alive for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, because otherwise, kind of without that, having that direction, if you to kind of take a step back, it's what are we actually aiming for here? Yes, you're doing your day-to-day job as
Yeah.
usual, but
Yeah.
you want that kind of motivation to be like, yes, I need to carry on doing that. And you need to obviously have a team around you who think like that as well in order to get there.
That's right. Because, a shared purpose, a shared goal is a very important thing when you're trying to drive teams and, aim for something, rather than if everyone's sitting around thinking why we're doing this, it's, that's obviously not going to lead to the best outcomes.
Yes, exactly.
So, again, sort of it's part of an overall leadership role, I think, in my position, but in all leadership positions.
Yeah. So was there any changes you'd like to bring to the industry in the future at all?
Well, I think, it's probably just around some of the things we've talked about, to be honest, around I would like to see, in the future, an industry where women are more represented at a senior level,
Yes, definitely.
in particular, and on site.
Mhm.
Because I think, we have moved a long way, and I think that's great.
But there's always room.
But there are definitely pockets where not as far as I would have liked to see. I'm sure a lot of people share that view. So, I would like to see that changing in the future. And just as I say, overall, I would like more people to see the type of career that you can have in
really
house building,
educate
development,
people.
property,
Yeah.
whatever, that into that world, because it does. I said this to you right at the start, it's not lost on me that I was lucky. I found it by luck, and I always look back on that, and I'm grateful that I was lucky. But it just makes you think, well, how many people
have missed out on this opportunity?
Have missed out, who might have really flourished in, an environment like this, and really forged a career that they've loved, and that is such a privilege in your life, really, if you can forge a career that you love.
Yes, exactly.
It is. It's so important, and so I just think I would love to think at least more people
can feel the same way and have that passion.
Or see it as an option, or decide it's not for them. Great, but
at least they're educated to know.
It's there as an option. Yeah.
So, kind of looking back at your career, is there anything that you would change at all? I mean, you could say no.
I'm sure there's lots of things I would change. I think, I'd be kidding myself if they were
like, no, it's not
I'd be kidding myself if I said no, there's nothing I would change. I mean, there's definitely been times along the way where and obviously I wouldn't go into it sort of individuals or circumstances, but where I could have dealt with things differently. You look back and you think I could have dealt with that situation differently. I could have, I don't know, maybe sort of been a bit more direct, a bit more honest earlier with these people, or things like that. But I also think it's important that as individuals you're prepared to acknowledge and look back and think,
and reflect. You've got to learn from it.
Learn from it. Make mistakes. Learn from it. Don't do it again.
Oh yeah, exactly. Make the mistake, learn from it, and then I
say to them so many times, I don't mind if we make a mistake, but I do mind if you do it again.
And it's repeatedly same one. It's
that's
like, come
where
on.
It's not acceptable.
Exactly.
It's not the first time. So I think, as a general principle, that's very important. There's always situations where you probably could have handled it better. And thinking about that, and it might be with individuals, it might be with, I don't know, external stakeholders, it might be a decision you made, whatever. I think looking back and reflecting and thinking, no, I should probably chalk that one up to experience and remember that wasn't my finest moment, and try not to do it again. And I think as well, giving that gift to other people as well, so they might not necessarily always appreciate it at the time, but I think trying to be honest with people and say, actually, I'm not sure you handled that in the best way you could have. And,
Yeah.
We might have wanted to think of doing it that a different way, or,
Yeah.
I'm not sure you realised the impact you had when you did that. Those sorts of small pieces of feedback along the way, I think, do help.
Definitely. Because some people don't realise that then in the wrong or could have done it a different way.
No.
So it is insightful for them to go, oh, actually, I didn't think of it in that kind of way. I'd just done it without, they could be completely oblivious.
And 9 times out of 10, intention is not the line of these people. It's not that they have bad intentions, these examples rather, but yeah, it might have just been oblivious, didn't realise, didn't think of it, didn't understand why somebody felt the way they did as a result of that. And I think, showing that to people, and, they act on it or don't act on it. But if you want to improve and you want to progress and you want to be better, then you should act on it.
Yeah.
So I think, those types of small interventions are really important as well. And I've had them, in my career, and I've given them to people. And I think often as well, it demonstrates the mettle of someone in how they kind of respond.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to act from kind of what we've spoken about, or are you going to take a huff?
Well, exactly that. Yeah. Do you take it positively?
Yeah.
Do you listen, reflect, and do something about it, or do you, are you defensive? Do you just decide in your own mind, you're wrong, I'm not going to see that?
Yeah, it's my way.
It's really interesting to see how, people react in those situations. But, I think it's an important thing to realise that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to look back and think.
Sadly, no one's perfect.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
You can aim for it, but sadly can't get it. Well, thank you very much, Ingrid, for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Brilliant. No, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the GSC Executives Podcast. Today's conversation was hosted and recorded by Caitlin Tighe, with editing and production managed by Stephen Smith. The podcast is produced by GSC Executives in conjunction with Daniel Owen Limited. For more details about our executive search solutions, as well as upcoming episodes, please visit our website, gscexecutives.co.uk. If you're keen to hear more industry insights, please consider subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. Until next time, continue to lead with excellence.